Hey guys, my name is Joyce, and for Wellness Wednesday this week, we will be looking at watercolor painting. Watercolor painting is something that I picked up during quarantine. It was just something for me to do. It was a nice escape from all the craziness that was happening around me, and also it was just a nice way to de-stress and relax. So hopefully you guys like this tutorial. I am in no means an expert at watercolor painting. I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos. That's it. But we're here to have fun and to de-stress. So in this tutorial, I will be going over some materials that we need, and then we'll go into some technique and some tips, and then afterwards at the end, we'll do a couple of projects. Okay, so now we're gonna quickly go over some materials that you'll need. So first you will need watercolor paints. They either come in tubes or a pan set like this. There are pros and cons to each. However, I do like using a pan set because it is very portable. You have the paints and the palette kind of connected. That way you can bring it with you when you travel or when you go for a hike. You will need some round brushes. For this tutorial, you will need a thicker round brush and a thinner round brush with a finer tip because we will need to do some thinner lines. And of course, we will need some watercolor paper to paint on. Today, I will be using the Fluid 100 watercolor paper. However, I would recommend the Canson watercolor paper because it is a popular brand, so you can find it at Walmart, Staples, Michaels, even online on Amazon, and it's cheap. I would like to point out that there are different types of watercolor paper. There is cold press finish, hot press finish, and then there's rough watercolor paper. I typically use cold press finish because it does have that grainy texture to it, but it's not too rough. I'm not a big fan of hot press finish paper because it's a little bit too smooth for my liking. So you do need 2 cups of water, 1 cup to clean off your dirty brush and the other cup to pick up clean water to activate your paints. Next, you will need a cup of salt. Fine table salt will do. Also, make sure that you do have some paper towel or a rag next to you so that you can dry off your brush. And I also have masking tape to tape down my paper when I'm painting, but this is totally optional. So next, we are going to go over some watercoloring techniques. So the first technique we'll look at is called the wet on wet technique. This technique just means that your paper is already wet before you apply wet paint on it. This technique is really good if you want to blend your colors nice, if you want to make that gradient. So for example, if you're painting a sky and you want that gradient from like a dark blue to a light blue to a yellow orange color, you can definitely use this technique. So I did draw out some rectangles in pencil. This is totally up to you. It's just for me to kind of make sure that I stay within the lines, but it's totally optional. Once you've had all the dots of paint on your paper, try blending the colors and see how easy it is to blend. It really depends on how much water you had on your paper in the first place and how much the paint has dried. But yeah, just play with this technique and see how much water you need on your paper and on your paintbrush. So the second technique is called a wet on dry technique. This means that the paper is dry when you apply the wet paint. This technique is really good if you want to do any outline or any detailing. It's really good for that. So next in the third box, we are just going to do a combination of both. So first I want to do a wet on wet technique, and then afterwards we will let it dry out and then do a wet on dry technique. So for this exercise, I am going to be using two different types of colors just to show you how well colors can blend using this technique. So afterwards, we are just going to use some clean water to kind of spread around some of the colors. So yeah, this is a really nice technique to blend colors. We'll let this dry first, and then we'll come back to do the wet on dry technique. So another important technique in watercoloring is called transparency. Unlike other painting mediums where you use white to lighten up a shade of color, for watercoloring, to lighten up a shade, you use more water. So I did use a red-ish color here. You don't have to use red, just pick your favorite color and then use it. So basically for this box here, I use as little amount of water possible to pick up as much paint, and this should be our darkest shade. So for the next shade of my color, I'm just gonna add like a few drops of water and then mix it in. These few drops of water will allow the paint to be more transparent and lighter. And then after that, again, I am just gonna put in a few more drops of clean water, mix it in with my paint, and this paint should be lighter than the paint that you applied before. Lastly, the same thing, and because this is the last box, you can actually add a little bit more water, maybe like 5-6 drops of water, and this should be your lightest color. If you do find that this color isn't as light as you want it to be, you can definitely add more watercolor. Just make sure that you don't let the paint dry out. It is easy to kind of mix in some of the colors when the paint is still wet. So yeah, make sure you spend some time to practice this concept, and definitely try it out with different colors. Like a light blue versus a dark blue will be different. So definitely try out some more colors and be comfortable with this technique. Now we're going to do the same exercise, but this time we're going to make a continuous gradient. So you want to load your brush with a lot of paint, making the color really dark. You can always add more paint to it if you think it's too light. And then afterwards, dip your brush into your water and then apply that water, spreading the color out, making this part lighter than the left side of the gradient. And then once you have like maybe a square left, add more water, making it lighter. If you do find that your paint is a little bit darker than you want it to be, you can do this technique where you use clean water, pick up the paint and then just dab the paint onto your rag, and it should lighten up the color. Next, we will look at two different ways of creating texture. Texture is a great way to add more life to your painting. So right now I'm just loading up my brush with some green paint. Make sure you do have enough water and just paint a layer of paint onto your paper. Once you're done creating a layer of paint, make sure the paint is still wet. Clean off your dirty brush and then pick up some clean water, gently tap onto the layer of paint. The clean water from the brush will spread the water outwards, creating a bloom, and this is a great way to add some texture into your painting. Okay, so now I'm just gonna pick up the same green, making sure that my brush is wet enough, and then I'm going to apply the layer of paint into the next box. So make sure that you don't let the paint dry. Just grab a pinch of salt and then sprinkle it onto the layer of paint. So you want to let the paint dry before brushing off your salt, and the effect of the salt will kind of, again, make some blooms, make it a little bit more blotchy, add in some texture to your painting. Go back to the third box on the top, and then now we're going to do the wet on dry technique. I'm just gonna pick up a black or a dark gray color, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and outline some of the blooms, and then just having fun with outlining stuff, making curves, making lines. Okay, so the first project that we'll be doing is painting rocks. So when I first started watercoloring, this was one of the projects that I started off with. I really like this project because there is no wrong way of doing it. Also, it allows me to play with different colors, shapes, and textures. This project also helps me with water control, so sometimes I'll paint a rock with more water than the other just to see how the color turns out. So as we go through this exercise, I'm not going to tell you how much water you need, what colors to use, what shapes to do. It's ultimately up to you. This is more of a paint with me kind of exercise. Okay, so here is an example of what your painting may look like. So as you can see, a lot of different colors and shapes. You will be needing your salt, so pour some out into a small bowl where you can pinch and sprinkle, and we're gonna have some fun. Okay, so before we get started, I'm just going to tape my borders down. Because we are doing such a repetitive exercise, I do want that defined border, and also I don't want my paper to move too much. Again, this is totally optional, it's really up to you, but I'm just gonna go ahead and tape my borders down. I really like this exercise because once I get into the groove, I kind of go on autopilot, so it's really relaxing for me. So if you want, before we get started, you can light a candle, pour out a glass of wine or tea if you haven't done so, and yeah, let's get started. So before I begin painting, I like wetting my paints first. I'm using a spray bottle right now, but you can definitely just use a wet brush and activate your watercolors that way. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just gonna go ahead and wet my brush. Okay, so next I'm just gonna mix up an orange. I use some yellow and some red for it. And this is gonna be the color of my first rock. Okay, so make sure that you are adding a lot of water because you are applying this paint onto a dry surface. So once your paintbrush hits the paper, just let your hands flow wherever it wants to go. Again, there is no perfect shape, it's all up to you. So now for our second rock, I am mixing up a lavender color with a pink and blue, and I am just going to paint it right beside my orange. If you want, you can definitely use a different color. So let's have some fun. So for this third rock, we are going to use our salt. I made a little mistake here by using too little water. When it's too little water, the effect of the salt is very subtle. So try to use a lot of water and then sprinkle some salt onto that rock. Okay, so for my next rock, I am going to attempt to do a wet on wet technique. So right now I'm using some clean water to outline a rock. And then I am choosing a yellowish color to fill it in. I didn't find this technique too useful to me. Maybe it was not enough water, or maybe the yellow color was too light, but didn't really do anything for me. I really like the wet on dry technique. However, if you want to do a rock with different distinct colors, I think this would be a good technique for that. So for our next rock, we're going to put in some texture in it. So I'm just going to fill it in with some paint, and then I am going to wash off the paint and then dip it in some clean water, and then gonna create some blooms by just tapping the tip of my brush onto the rock to create this texture. Now I'm just gonna let you guys go off on your own, experiment with some new colors, different shapes, different textures, and yeah, I will be popping in sometimes to give some techniques or some tips, but other than that, you guys have fun. So hey guys, I'm just gonna pop back in to talk about this one characteristic of watercoloring. So for watercoloring, it's really easy to blend the colors when the paints are still wet. As you can see here, the pink rock, it's kind of leaking into the yellow rock, and that's because both rocks are still wet. So yeah, I really like this characteristic of watercoloring. Definitely helps to blend colors nicely. So guys, just a reminder, play with different colors, play with different amount of water. You know, use a lot of water for one rock, use very little for the other. Different textures. You can even use tissue paper or a Q-tip to pick up some of the colors to make kind of like a cloudy texture. So yeah, keep it up. Alright, so I hope that you guys enjoyed this project. I hope that it was relaxing for you guys. So just set this project aside, let it dry, and then we will go on to our second project. Okay, so I hope you guys had a nice little break. Make sure that you have 2 cups of clean water and that you refilled your beverage. So for this project, we will be drawing jellyfishes. The main colors for our jellyfish would be kind of like a dark blue with some pink, some green. So make sure that you have those colors. And yeah, let's get to it. So we will start by doing a wet on wet technique. So load up your brush with a lot of water and then start tracing out a semicircle for the jellyfish body. And make sure that the semicircle is filled with water as we will be putting paint into this semicircle. So once you think that you've had enough water in your semicircle, start pulling some of the water down through the middle section of the jellyfish to make that wavy middle section of the jellyfish. So afterwards, mix yourself a dark blue color. We will start applying that into our semicircle. I really like using the wet on wet technique because in the semicircle we will be putting a lot of different colors in it. It'll be easier for us to mix up and blend the colors. So next we will put in a lighter blue color. It doesn't have to be the entire hood, just a little bit of paint here and a little bit of paint there, and start mixing the light blue with the dark blue. Okay, so next I am going to drag some of the blue down into the middle section of the arm, the body. Make sure that you're using more water as you want this section to be lighter. So afterwards, I'm gonna add in some pink and some green just to add a little bit more color, a little bit more pattern to the jellyfish. And just don't forget to blend around it. You can definitely use other colors too, whichever ones you think would look nice with the blue. So once you're done with the colors, just go over the outline with a darker blue color just to give an outline to the jellyfish. Okay, so now using a thinner brush, we are going to draw out some of the tentacles. And with the tentacles, you have a lot of freedom. So whichever color you want, which direction, if you want it to spiral, it's all really up to you. With regards to the colors, I really like using the same colors that I used on the hood of the jellyfish. So some pink, some green, some blues. Yeah. So here you can see that the hood is not blended too nicely. Another tip is to use some clean water to pick up some of that edge, and hopefully that will smooth things out. Once you're done with the tentacles, you can put another wash of paint in the middle part of the jellyfish just to create more layers. Okay, so for our second jellyfish, it's going to be the exact same thing. I am going to be using the same colors. However, this time I am going to apply more water before we get started and use more paint so that this jellyfish will be a little bit more fuller in color. So this is exactly like what we did for the first jellyfish. If you want to experiment with other colors, you can go ahead and do that. But yeah, just make sure that you have a lot of water in that hood and in the middle to begin with. And yeah, experiment a little and have fun. And if you think that one jellyfish is enough for you, just skip to the end of this video where I explain how to fill out the white space behind your jellyfish and create some splashes to add more character to your painting. So once you have all your jellyfish painted, we are just gonna fill out some of the background with very light shades of blue. Again, very light, so a lot of water. You don't want this part to be too bright, as you want it to be the background to your jellyfish. So once you're done with the background, just leave your painting to dry for 10 to 15 minutes. So one last final step to your painting is to add some splashes onto your painting. I am going to use the colors that I used here. However, if you have white or like silver or something, that would make your painting really pretty too. So ultimately, you do want a lot of water and a lot of paint in your brush. So I have two techniques for applying splashes onto my painting. The first one is to hit my paintbrush onto my index finger, and that can create some splashes. So another way is to pull the paintbrush back. This will allow you to create more controlled splashes of paint. So if you don't mind getting yourself dirty, you can definitely use this technique. So I hope that you guys liked this tutorial. I really enjoyed putting all of this together for you guys. So yeah, if you have Instagram, you can definitely post this up and tag the Student Council Michener Instagram page. I would love to see what you guys created today. I want to wish you all the best of luck for the remainder of the term. Stay safe, and thank you for tuning into Wellness Wednesday this week.